Good evening, everybody. It was a different world way back when. We're talking 2,000, 2,500, 4,500 years ago, 4 millennia and a half ago. Things were different back then. What was different before the flood came into this place? As far as we know, right, it had never rained, and there's a strong theory meaning pretty good evidence behind that. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Possibly it never rained. Okay, as well. That's a very legitimate theory for which there's evidence behind that it seems that perhaps there's one giant landmass back when. What else? And possible also that the oceans were, one big ocean, was shallower than what it is today. What else? Longer lifespan. Oldest guy, who is he? How old? Close. 969, very good. Noah comes into a close second. How old was he? I say that. He may not have been the second oldest, but he was up there. I always felt like that was an easy one to remember. 950, that's an even one. He's got 600 years until the flood, 350 after. So 950 with those. Yeah, people lived a long time back then. That's certainly the case. What do we know about animals back when? From the fossil record? Okay. And right, depending on how you classify them, maybe you could consider some dinosaurs still alive, but certainly the majority of them anyway, right? Big animals. Kind of getting at that, there is in the fossil record some evidence of animals being considerably larger than what they are today. Not all, but some are that way. Crocodiles, maybe some sharks, and so on. Anything else stand out to you? Huh? We were bigger too? Okay, especially some people. Those are Andre's back then, Andre's ancestors, right? We didn't? No, it's... Okay, it seems to be probably a little nicer worldwide than what we have today. Some of that could have to do, though, with the congregating of land in one place. Might be, maybe not. So, yeah, all right, so there are a lot of things that were different, and getting to there, too. Big people. They're really big people. We call them the giants. Now in Scripture, they're given, I think it's at least 3 different names from Hebrew. We're going to be talking about a little bit today, Nephilim, the Nephilim. There's also the Rephidim. Those people were around. And then there's one other one. Anakim is the other one. Anakim, descendants of Anak. There wasn't as much sickness, for sure, yeah. And going back far enough, there wasn't any sickness or death, right? Yeah, eventually back, good. Okay, so different time back then. There's one thing, though, that isn't a whole lot different than what we have today, right before the flood happened, and that was the condition of humanity. Turn, if you will, to Genesis chapter 6. If you need to, if you've done your homework, you might not need to. Genesis chapter 6, who would like to tell us the 5th verse, preferably from memory? As in, it must be from memory. Roy, please do, sir. Genesis 6:5. Roy, you have any thoughts on that? Does that tell you anything? Through and through. Sometimes we'll say evil to his or her core. Quite literally, evil to his or her core. And every thought that ran through humankind, not just every action or just every word that was spoken, but every thought that went through humanity's mind was evil. And more than that, the intent behind it was evil. Again, we would say completely rotten to the core. It's sad that humanity got to that point. It might be a good benchmark for us to consider. How long had the world been around? As far as we know, time frame, approximate, we're not saying exact, but approximately, how long had the world been around? It seems that the flood comes about from the chronologies that were given, lineages and so on, about 2500 BC. So do you know biblically as well as historically and scientifically what we have evidence? All evidence points to the world starting about what year? It's different from what we learned in mainstream modern science class, but it's about 6,000 years ago, creation, good. So 2500 BC for the flood would put us, the earth's been around for about how long when the flood comes on the earth? A little less. About 1,500 years. Oh, from us. It'd be a little bit more from us still, but yeah. Right, okay. So about 1,500 years that it's been around, and it's just a complete mess. It took 1,500 years, and really it took the lifespan of 1.5 groups of people, because the lifespan is being so long, about 950 years back then. All right, so for those who have joined us who aren't our regulars, thank you for being here. We're so glad to have you, a number of visitors. What we're doing in this study, and we just began it the last time that we congregated, is that we're looking at the church being a fulfillment of this first structure that God has built in Noah's Ark. We're paralleling some of these things side by side. It's fascinating. You can do this with a number of things in the Old Testament. All of these structures that God commanded to be built seem to be anticipatory of something greater on the horizon. As I mentioned already, unfortunately, things aren't a lot different today than what they were back during the time of the flood. I will say, we hear a lot of times, oh, the world's so evil. And I don't believe by any means it's as evil as it was back then, per capita. Now, I'm sure you probably have more violent crimes and murders and all that kind of stuff that goes on today. Per capita, I don't think it's anywhere close to as evil as what it was back then. However, there is a prophecy that's made in the New Testament, and I'd like for you to read it with me in 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. 2 Timothy 3, we'll be reading the first 4 verses. But know this, Paul the Apostle states, that in the last days, okay, pause right there. We encounter this some, Hebrews 1 and 2, and Acts the 2nd chapter, and we're told this is being fulfilled right now in your hearing, and that's almost 2,000 years ago. There are 2 ways of looking at this. Some see it as the last days of the Jewish state, Israel, as a sovereign entity which fell in AD 70, so kind of at the conclusion of the time period of biblical writing. That could be. I think there's a little more credence behind the idea that it's the last major age of time, the last dispensation or the Christian age. You have God speaking to the heads of the households, the fathers, all the way to Moses. That's for 2,500 years. And then you have God speaking through his law, given by Moses, and then through his prophets for 1,500, roughly, years. And then you have Jesus dying on the cross. We talked about that the last time we were together. And you have the Christian age or the church age coming into being. Personally, I believe it's a reference to the church age. I don't think it's to the end of the Jewish state. We could go into that more, but I don't really desire to for what our purposes are. But when we read this, in the last days, I don't think he's saying the last 2 or 3 24-hour periods that Earth exists. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence behind that. But in the last major period of time, he says, and he's looking forward, will come. He says, it's not that way yet, but during that last period, you're going to start to see these conditions. Perilous, meaning dangerous, times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves. And there's this whole big, long, nasty list of sins that comes after this one. But how fitting, and you might see it this way as a progression, how fitting it starts right here. What's at the core of every rebellion against God? It's not any longer about what God wants. Who wants it? It's selfishness and what I want. Men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, obsessed with it, chase it, smell it, blow their nose in it. Hopefully not that. It's just everything is about money and the things that money can buy. Boasters, they'll brag about their accomplishments, how great they are, how smart they are, how good looking they are, how successful they are. They're perfect in every way, at least as they see themselves, because they are in love with themselves. Proud, which makes sense. If you're going to be talking about how great you are, you're going to have to think it first. You're normally not just going to be speaking something that you don't think. Blasphemers. This is going to be really similar to a word that we're going to find later, slanders. I think this one may be spoken in relation to God. Strictly, it doesn't have to be. What does it mean to blaspheme? You. Eeny, meeny, miny, fun. What do you think? Very good. Okay. So generally it's to speak against, but I think you're right. In this context, it probably seems to be, as it's used many times in the Bible, to use injurious, I think it's the way you say it, but harsh words toward God, but really just harsh in speech, nasty things that are stated. Disobedient to parents. No respect for the ones who brought them into this world and who take care of them, looked out for them, or may still be looking out for them. Unthankful. Don't appreciate what they have. Have a delicious meal that's made for them and put on the table. Ew, I don't like cornbread. All right, well here, then I'll make you macaroni and cheese. Anyway. Unholy. We might say about that one just immoral. Just kind of making a mess of life and everything you want, your own decisions without really thinking them through well. That's completely unlike God. Unloving, just don't care about people. Couldn't care less. Because it is, after all about self. Unforgiving. You just can't let something go in the past. One time there was someone who did something towards you, and what they said just hurt your feelings so badly, you'll never forget it. Even when they said after, right after that was dumb. I apologize. I'm really sorry. Slanderers. Okay, this is very similar to blasphemers, and I think this may be more about people than it is about God, although the concepts are very similar. You're using lies to run others down, and perhaps an advancement of self. Make yourself feel better, look better, get a promotion, whatever it might be, before somebody else. Without self-control, no self-restraint, no discipline. If I want it, I'm going to go after it and do it. Love what's evil, hate what's good. Hate those who practice it and promote it. Traitors, like it's difficult to find a good friend, someone on who you can rely and you could really confide in that person. Headstrong. You try to talk to them about it, just can't get through. They won't listen. Nobody can tell them anything because they already know everything. They love themselves and they're full of themselves. Haughty or high-minded. Okay, now this is similar. This would be like synonymous with pride and a boaster. I think it's just a little bit different though. Someone who is haughty or high-minded, yeah, they love themselves, but how does this relate to others and how do they interact with others? Maybe better, how do they think of others? Okay, so very good, Lizzie. So we talk about people that hold almost like they hold their nose up in the air, whenever they walk. They're too good, and they're looking down upon everyone else. So they're in this high standing looking down on everyone else. We studied this recently, a good biblical example of it. Luke 18. You have the Pharisee and the tax collector. How does the Pharisee think about himself? God, I thank you. Obviously, I'm not saying this, understand. God, I thank you, he says as he prays, that I'm so awesome. I thank you that I tithe every bit of what I have to, if not even more. God, I thank you that I fast 100 times more than law would demand of me. And so he's going, everything is about how great he is. Consequently, how does he look at others? God, I thank you that you have made me so great, and I'm sorry. Good? Is that what you said too? Right. Okay, so two things. You're both right. So first he says, God, I thank you that I am, ... all these great things. And not like other men, like any other man. And especially not like this guy, not John, but the guy behind him, the tax collector. But that's the mentality. So that's what we're talking about here in being high and mighty, holding your nose up in the air, high-minded, haughty. Roy? Is that an older song? Okay, I don't take it the wrong way. I just asked because I hadn't heard it, but I want to look it up now. So that sounds pretty good. That's funny. That's funny. I'm glad you brought it up. And I'm not poking at you, okay? That's funny. I appreciate that, Joe. Thank you, sir. Yeah, getting to be less and less of those things, though. Seems like every year. Traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. So it's, man, if I like something, if I enjoy it, I'm going to do it. And then someone says, but God, whatever. I've already made my mind up. It doesn't matter what God tells me. And that's the thing. It's about pursuing pleasure instead of pursuing God. Now, as we go through this whole list of things, does any of this from society, and I don't mean this like strictly to say, oh, those people out, I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. Are we struggling with any of these things too? I hate to do that just to try to talk about other people. I'm talking about our society, ourselves included. Do we see any of these things as a problem today? I think. Yeah, so if you didn't hear, Stephanie says, I feel a little bit like reading this is like watching the news. We see this stuff all the time. And especially some of these that have seemed to have, I think over the last several decades, become so much more severe as they're manifesting themselves. In particular, disobedient to parents, unthankful, lovers of money, obsessed with self. Are we so busy and we think so much of ourselves as we're walking through the grocery store, we can't make eye contact with people that we encounter and say, hey, how are you doing? And just have a smile on our faces. We're focused. We don't even see people to the side. Or maybe we're just so, we're reading on our phones or texting back or calling the next person. I'm not saying those things are wrong in themselves. I mean, we're busy. We have things going on. But we need to be careful of even how we carry ourselves. And more importantly, what's going on in our hearts. Do we not care about anyone around us and the things that they might be experiencing? Whatever it is and wherever we might encounter them. All right, I'd like for us to read together, if you don't mind, Titus chapter 3. It's the same writer also penning these words to a preacher. These letters are kind of similar to each other. Titus chapter 3 and verse 3, the apostle states it this way. And this is what I mentioned to you and I appreciate about him. He just generally states, hey, the Spirit says in the last days in the Christian dispensation, things are going to get worse and worse if you'll continue on in chapters 3 and 4 of 2 Timothy. And, eventually the whole world is going to be like this, kind of like it was back in the days of Noah. But I appreciate what he says in Titus chapter 3, verse 3. For we ourselves, so it's not, that old wicked world out there. Hey, he says, we were a part of this too, and that's the mindset that we need to maintain. Just because we live in a society that manifests a lot of these characteristics doesn't mean that it can't be changed. We ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived. And that's something important to keep in mind. Serving various lusts and pleasure, living in malice and envy. Malice would be like unforgiving, kind of back in 2 Timothy 3. Hateful and hating one another. Paul says, I've been there. I was living that life. And he's writing to a preacher, by the way. And he's saying, you as a preacher used to be this way. Maybe not while he was preaching, but before you found out what Jesus could do for you, this is the lifestyle in which you were engaging, just like everybody else around you. But the point is, you changed. And people can change. That doesn't mean that we become qualified, so to speak, for heaven, but it means that the opposite of what we read here, God is merciful and he's forgiving, and he can let us loose of all of these legal debts that we owe to him and give us a new lease on life. And then we, changed based on the goodness of God, can share that goodness and his very character with others. You know this one in Romans chapter 3, but you'll probably need to turn there, as I will also. I want to broaden from verse 23. I know we quote that one a lot. All of sin comes short of the glory of God, but you read the context of this, it's stressed a little bit more than that. Verse 9 of Romans 3, same guy by inspiration, Paul, and again, I appreciate the mentality behind. What then? Are we Jews? Better than they, Gentiles? Not at all, or not one bit. Today we might say of ourselves, all by ourselves, separate from Christ, we Christians, are we any better off than the world? Not at all, not one bit. For we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. And look at the stressing that takes place on heart here. There is none who understands, that's the mind. There is none who seeks after God, that's the heart or the mind. They have all turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, that's action. No, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness, or malice, unforgiving. And as far as what they speak, like blasphemers and slanderous. We've encountered all of this before. And that means every word they speak, or very, very many words they've spoken, everyone is guilty, every single person. Their feet are swift to shed blood, that's violence. Destruction and misery are in their ways, no peace, no happiness. Speaking of which, verse 17, and the way of, or the way to peace, they have not known. So why in the world would people lead these lifestyles that are miserable for here and totally unprepared for eternity? Why would anyone do that? That's the dumbest thing in the world, or for that matter, out of this world. Remember what Paul said? We ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient. Well, why were you that way? Why was I that way? And why were you, like not Paul, but you, that way? He says, we were, what D word? Deceived. We didn't realize. We didn't understand. You know the guy in the story of the rich man and Lazarus? We had that not too far back in Luke 16. Do you think if he had any idea what he was going to be experiencing for the lifestyle that he led here, do you think there's any way he would have continued living the way he was while he was here? Maybe so. Personally, I don't. I don't think he would have. And you can tell by his interaction with Abraham, if that's literally Abraham, some think it's Jesus or whatever. I think it's probably Abraham, just for the record. And in his interaction, you can tell it's like, well, man, we got to send back and got to warn. I think he wants to send back and warn because he thinks if they realize this, now he does go on to say, well, they're not going to change if someone warns them even from the dead. But I do wonder, and I know that's not eternal hell, but it's the stair step to it. I do wonder if every single human being could spend just one day in hell. Honestly, anyway, I wonder, would it change the way we're living right now? I don't know that there's anybody who would continue living the way they were that sent them to that place if you could just experience it for one day and to know that's what you'll have forever. Well, the issue, I think, isn't that we're convinced of where we're going if we're living the wrong kind of life. I think it's we don't understand, we don't realize. A lot of times we don't think this kind of life is going to lead us to that place. Because there's some good things that we did, and we can compare ourselves to other people. We're not as bad as them. And so that, that's probably good enough, we would think. Rick? Right, it's a habit. Yeah, you're right. It's a comfortable habit is what it is. Isn't that I know it's kind of sad the way it's stated here, but on the other end, I think we could look at it with real positivity. The way of peace they have not known. So what's our objective here? What do? We need to brainstorm, and God gives us some tremendous ideas. Jesus is the best at it. To try to communicate to people what it is on which they're missing out. And to make sure that we do it not from the high-minded way, looking down on them, but to have the attitude of the apostle. Look, I'm not preaching to you from a platitude of perfection. That's not who I am. I'm no better off than anybody in this place, not me myself. But God has been so gracious with me to let me experience the other side. And so from that, I know what he has in mind for you can benefit you just as much, if not even more, than what it has me. So if we can get across and communicate the way of peace, but as God looks down, he sees on all humanity, just like he looked down in Genesis chapter 6, and he sees on all humanity, there is not one good of him or herself. Verse 18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. That's the context of verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Aren't you grateful, though, we don't have to stop there in this story? Wouldn't it be a hideous thing if we stopped at Genesis 6:5, which is our memory verse for last week? We're going to have our one for this week here in just a minute. That the Lord looks down and he sees that not a single intention of anyone's thought who's alive is positive. If that were the period, that'd be rough. In Romans chapter 3 of verse 18, I know there's a period there, but if that were the period on this excerpt, that would be an awful truth. But thank God it isn't the truth. The story continues. Verse 24, being justified. I love that word. One of my favorites in biblical terminology, especially old ancient terms. Justification, justified. We know that, don't we? That's the letter of Romans. That's the theme of it, justified. What does that mean? We need it. First of all, he establishes over the course of many chapters, 3, 4 of them, we're all guilty, we're all condemned to die under the law. But thanks be to God that through Jesus, his Son, we've been justified. We're not righteous, meaning we're not declared in judgment. You're righteous, not inherently, that is, not of ourselves, but I will look at you as justified. I will look at you as accommodatively righteous, but to be justified means you've been made just if I'd never sinned. Of course, that's not true, but it's just like I had never sinned. Being justified freely. Man, how many times have you done something really stupid and immediately you thought, or maybe an hour later, oh, please just let me wake up from this bad dream. This cannot be real. What were you thinking? Why did you say that? Why did you do that? If you only just rewind time and you never would have done that, how incredible would that be? But you can't undo the thing that's been done. You can't unspeak the word that's been spoken. How awesome is God that he chooses to look at things, if you'll let him, like you never did that stupid thing. Or you never spoke those dumb words. And the thousands of times you've done it. What would you pay if you could turn back time? That's another song. What would you pay? 80s, right? 80s, yeah, I don't know who, but if you could turn back time on your life's one dum-dum, like the biggest one, the most ignorant thing you spoke or what you did, what would you pay to be able to do that? So God says, hey, look, if you'll let me, I'll choose to look at it like the thousands of idiotic things that you've done and said, like you never said them and you never did them. Okay. How much will that cost me? Oh, you're interested? Great. It doesn't cost you a penny. Freely. Being justified freely by his grace. That's not what you deserve. That's what you don't deserve. Through the redemption, that is money. That's a monetary transaction right there. You were bought back. Can you imagine 150 years ago plus in our country and being a slave and just thinking, wow, these free people, they have it made. What do you think you would pay if you could have your freedom? What would it cost? Redemption found it's free. Yeah, sure. If you're interested, I'll give that to you. It doesn't cost you anything, though. Through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation, which means a payment price or a payoff for what we owed, by his blood that was innocent, not ours that was guilty, through faith, trust, to demonstrate his righteousness, not ours. We're justified, but we're not inherently righteous. Because in his forbearance, patience, overlooking, grinning and bearing it, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be both just and the justifier. That's pretty cool right there. So he is inherently just, and then he justifies in his goodness us, of the one who has faith in or who trusts in Jesus. Basically what he's saying is this: when we mess things up and we're going to die, and we should die, it's only right that we should pay for our transgressions in whatever way it is. God just has a way of providing some kind of vehicle by which he preserves us, at least those who want to be and will accept his loving favor. And that's not just true today. That starts in the 6th chapter of Genesis, the first time humanity had royally messed everything up, and everybody deserves to die. It's what they have coming to them. It's only right, only just. God says, yeah, but I don't want to do that, though. And so in my goodness, in my forbearance, in my graciousness, I will have this large vessel built in which people can be saved. Does that sound familiar at all? God always finds some construction whereby people can be saved. But the key is this: in all the mistakes that we make, we have to be willing to turn away from them. And then hopefully, when it's all said and done, to take some valuable lessons even out of the bad decisions that we made. Look, God can take the worst of things and turn it into positivity. The vicious murder of his son, the worst atrocity humanity has ever conceived, he ends up turning into the greatest blessing that humanity has ever received. And here we are, all the dumb decisions we make, and we think, oh, there's no way to go up from here. You kidding? So what you've done is worse than murdering God in the flesh? I seriously doubt it. If he can take that and turn it into the greatest of blessing, he can probably take your mistakes and turn them into some kind of masterpiece as well. So what is humanity's first major mistake that led to the destruction of the world? Genesis chapter 6. Genesis 6. Read with me in verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass. I don't think this is like everybody's inherently righteous and then goes to bed one night and wake up and the whole world's rotten. This is a slow degradation of society. Again, you even look back on our world, there's a lot of wickedness going on, some things that we wish weren't that way. 10 years ago, it wasn't exactly that way. 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, especially 120 years ago, it's been a progression to get to where we are today. It was for these people too, over 1,500 years. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. You go back to Genesis 2, and what was God's original plan for marriage? What does God draw up here? Okay, you have Adam, and then you've got the 400 sister wives, and that's not what he drew. What did he draw up? He only used one rib because he's only making one woman because that's all that guy needed. One man, one woman for life. And I think sometimes we overlook this, but what kind of a man and what kind of a woman? I mean, character-wise, what kind of people are these? I realize they make mistakes and they're human beings, but when he takes them and he puts them together, what kind of people are they? They're good people. Well, yeah, made in his own image, after his own heart. I would agree, Gene. These are godly people. He takes two godly people, one man, one woman, and he says that's what you need to make a great home and a life together. And so that's his plan. Over the scale of about 1,500 years, people are like, well, why have one when you can have, in the case of Solomon, 1,000? And so they start taking all of these, and I know there's a context to Genesis 6. I don't wish to deep dive into the Nephilim, even though I did mention them and sons of God and all that right here. But the short of it is this, that people began to abuse marriage. What kind of people? I think they were big people who made other big people. But regardless, though, people began to abuse God's beautiful institution and his plans for marriage. And they start intermarrying with people who aren't good, don't have good intentions, even though they started having good intentions. And then they're this offspring that just create a real mess in the world. And it's just a complete disaster because we don't go about things the good and the right way. Look down at verse number 4. There were giants, Nephilim, in the earth in these days. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men who are of renown. And I don't know that that's a compliment. Yes, sir. Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know that this is a compliment. Like, oh, everybody knows them. It's like, oh, everybody knows them. I think it's one of those things. That was it. Go ahead, Joe. Yeah. Unfortunately, I would agree. As we realize, we've heard it, but it's an adage. It's true 100% of the time. As goes the family, so goes the nation. For that matter, as goes the nation, so goes the world. And it's not just in America. It's all over the world that we've seen this. It seems like more and more, less of an emphasis placed on marriage, God's standards for marriage and for family, and that goes beyond our marital relationships as kids, interactions with kids, kids with parents, and grandparents and grandkids, and all sorts of things. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Joe. Roy? You can't do this to me, Roy. You can't do it. No, it's okay. The problem is, Roy, I want to do it, and I can't. I can't do it. No, good question. So there are two main views. I would say the most mainstream and probably the church circle is that the sons of God are the descendants of Seth, and that the daughters of men are the descendants of Cain who intermarry with each other. I used to have that position for like 25 years. I don't anymore. I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other. But yeah, the other option is that phraseology, the sons of God, as translated from Hebrew, that's plural. It's important to recognize it's plural. Not the son of God or a son of God. But the sons of God, as translated from Hebrew in the Old Testament, it's found 5 times, and 4 of the 5, I believe it's 3 times it's found. 5 is the Nephilim. Sorry, I may be confusing there. The point of which is, every time it's found, it's a clear-cut reference to angels, the sons of God. And then you have this one reference in Genesis 6, and we ask, well, what's that one? Every other time it's angels that are being referenced. We do know this. There are many times when people encounter angelic beings, they don't even know they're angels right up front, and they're called men. And that seems to be because they have flesh that's being used, not because they've been sent to live out a normal lifespan probably on the earth, but very likely God gives them flesh to go perform some mission, like the 3 men who come and visit Abraham. And so that's the other view between the two. Yeah, thanks for asking. You tempt me. I like that. It's a fascinating discussion, that's for sure. Anybody wants to, I'd be glad we can talk a little bit more afterward, though, about that. So man's first mistake. Don't look at marriage and companionship the way that God intended for it to be. Are we duplicating any of those mistakes today? We're not going to have the time to read all of these, but I would just like to point out a warning that's given to us. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. I said one. I'd actually like to do 2 if you'll allow me. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 26. The righteous should choose his friends carefully. We're not talking about rotten people right here. The righteous. Those who are consistently doing the right thing, who are God-fearing, people-loving individuals. You better be careful picking your friends, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. You surround yourself with evil influences, and eventually, it might not be right off the bat, but eventually you're going to become like them. Jim Rohn, a famous motivational speaker, has a lot of really neat quotes and statements about society. One of my favorites is this: you are the average of your 5 closest friends. And if you think about that, there's a lot of truth to it. Okay, I have this one friend who's this, and I have this friend who's over here, I have this friend who's in the middle. What about the other 2 friends? Because it's very likely, if you take into account the 5 closest people to you in your life, you're probably the average of those. Add them all together and divide by 5, and that's who you are. Pretty interesting thought. Very biblical, I would say, also. All right, so how does God feel whenever he looks down and he sees, man, my creation is a real mess 1,500 years into this humanity experiment? Genesis chapter 6, verse 6. Anyone want to say our memory verse for tonight? Then we're caught up on memory. Genesis 6, 6. Attaboy, Roy. Go ahead. That's a great question. And what seems to be articulated in Genesis 6:6 is not a change. You look back at creation, everything is very good, and I know there's not just a lot stated about it. You can tell God's really excited, though, about all of this, the creation of everything. And I believe what we find here, Roy, is not a change in purpose, because God knows all things. He would know if he would say later on, you know, I wish I wouldn't make human beings. Well, he wouldn't make that mistake of creating us in the first place, right? I don't think what's being expressed here is a change of purpose on the part of God as much as it is a change in feeling. In the beginning, he's so happy and excited because he shared life and blessing with others. And now, because of the justice of God, what does he know he has to share? But death and cursing. And he's not excited about that. God doesn't like to do that. And I like to relate this with an earthly parent. You have your own way of choosing to discipline your children. I do mine. But I don't enjoy whipping my kids. I will do it. I've done it many, many, many times. And I'll continue to if I need to. Thankfully, there's not nearly many of those, it seems like now, that have to be given out as what there were earlier. And I've told you this before. For me personally, I don't like to use objects whipping my children. Others do, that's fine. I had objects used on me, trust me. I prefer using my hand. And the reason for that is when I give a good one, it hurts. Like it hurts me when I do it. And so that kind of helps me to have a little bit of an idea of what I'm dishing out, number one. But number two, I like it to physically hurt me as it's hurting them. Because that's the way I feel on the inside when I have to do that. God knows what he has to do in punishing his kids. He's not excited about it. And I think you can make the case that it's going to hurt him more than it's going to hurt them. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't change. He still punishes, doesn't he, when he needs to. He still doesn't enjoy it, though. 1 Timothy 2, 3, and 4, this is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior, who, you want to know what he wants? He desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. He would much rather not discipline than have to deal out punishment. But we shouldn't overlook the reality that he's willing to if that's what we demand from him. He's willing to do it, even though it's not his favorite thing to do. All right, the last thing I'd like to point out is this as we do close. Because of humanity's transgressions, we know what's coming. We kind of alluded to it already. Verse 7 of Genesis 6 would have been a good memory, but I've run out of those to assign to you. So Genesis 6, verse 7. So the Lord said, here's what I have to do. I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Again, not a change in purpose. He knew down the line what he was going to have to do, but a change in feeling because he doesn't get to share blessing and life. Now he has to share cursing and punishment. And as we close, I'll mention this. Is there any destruction pending right now for humanity's transgressions? Do you know of anything going on, Cindy? Any plans that are being made up above? 2 Peter 3 in the 5th verse. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5. We're told that the day of the Lord is going to come. This they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing in the water and out of the water, by which the earth that then existed perished. How? Being flooded with water. But then we're told, by the same word, the heavens and the earth that are being preserved are reserved for destruction, but how? Not by water, but it's equal opposite, with fire. There is destruction that's pending on this place also. I said this once tonight, and I'll say it a second time, and then I'll quit. I'm glad the story doesn't end here, aren't you? Because if it were at this point, there's no hope for Noah, and there's no hope for any of the rest of us. But if you'll come back, I want you to come back next Wednesday too, because we have our meeting going on. But if you'll come back the next week also, following that, we'll get to talk about the hope, the blessing, the life, and the rebirth that God supplies, starting with Noah, and then how that translates over into our time. Any other thoughts, though, that you would like to bring out for tonight? Some really good comments, some good questions, too. Okay, for next time, if I'm not missing any, it's kind of hard to do a reading assignment. I mean, it's just going to be a little bit more in Genesis chapter 6 if you want to look over some more of that. Let's do verse 9 for memory work. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. I think we all know pretty well about what Noah and his family find from God in verse 8, but this focuses on why and how they find this from God. And then I want to consider, how does that work for you and I today? Genesis 6, 9, memory word. Okay, thanks.